Both of my lectures for today are one of these where you're going to take notes. They're practical lectures. They're how-to lectures. In fact, this one is entitled 5 Minutes with a Darwinist. 5 Minutes with a Darwinist. So if you only had a few minutes to talk to your friends who believed in Darwinian evolution, how would you approach them? How would you start the conversation? What would you say to get things going there? Or maybe you have a friend like this. Your friend thinks he's related to a chimp. And now what? What are you going to do? So these are how-to lectures on an effective way to talk to your friends who may believe in evolution without getting into an argument. Wow, wouldn't that be nice to do something like that or even hear something like that, those things? So I know most of you have already heard about this, and many of you probably already get our news magazine, Acts and Facts. This has been a free publication from ICR for over 55 years. And we have donors who make sure everybody gets it free. We have free samples out there on our table. And if you'd like to have it mailed to you, just sign up. I don't know if any of you are these people who watch YouTube that much, but you can subscribe to those as well. I'm not really into all of these things. In fact, I don't even know what all of them stand for. But if you know what that is, you can follow us on these things as well. In fact, my slide is old, because one of these icons, I guess, is obsolete now, and it's that, which has been replaced with an X. So if you follow us on those things, you can subscribe. Now, note-taking time. FLUFF, it's an acronym. It'll be a way for you to help you organize your thoughts, to get going in the conversation, to show that evolution is more air than substance. F, focus the discussion. Focus the discussion on that. So you want to define some terms really quick. L, less than persuaded. We want to work a phrase into our vocabulary. Less than persuaded. That's a good one. U, unobserved important events. Unobserved important events. F, failed mechanism for design. And then finally, ending on a positive note with your friends, the freedom that we have, the freedom that we have in creation science that allows us to approach things in a really rational way. And now that you have been scribbling really fast, if you just want to sit back and listen, there is this booklet out at the table which you can get, which has everything I said in it. So if you're more like me, who would just like to just kick back, listen to this thing, I'd go out there and I'd get this booklet. If you're like my wife, you would buy the booklet and still take notes in the booklet on those things. So there she is right up here in the front. She's a note-taking animal for everything. So you can have the choice. You can either get the book or you can take some notes. All right, point number 1, F, focus the discussion. Don't be one of these wide rambling people like you see on debates on TV that can't stay on topic, that just are all over the place. You don't want to be like that. Why? Because time is limited. So you need to define some terms of what you're talking about there, and you want to use some reputable sources. So if we're talking about evolution, obviously, the first term that we need to define is what? Evolution. Evolution. So here's one from the National Association of Biology Teachers, the largest biological organization in the world. And they say the diversity of life on Earth is the outcome of evolution. Bang, right off. That's a good definition. That's better than just saying change or change over time or something really vague. So when I'm on a radio interview or a TV interview where I'm talking to a friend, I'll say something like, now when I'm talking about evolution, I'm talking about something which is supposed to explain the diversity of life on Earth. That's important. Did everything evolve? So when I'm talking about evolution, I'm talking about something that's supposed to explain what? The diversity of life on Earth. That's a good definition. We can argue over that. Did that really happen? Or did it not? Not whether it changes. I mean, how many of you looked in the mirror recently and said, man, have I changed on those kinds of things? Everyone changes. This is important. Second, science. Science. And here's a fast, quick definition. I hold that science is based on observation and testing. Observation and testing. Simple. Science is based on observation and testing. It's a way of knowing about the world. It's a way of knowing based on those things. Revelation, the Bible's a way of knowing about the world. Science is another way of knowing about the world. Science is based on observation and testing. Now, last night, Buzzy, I had dinner with Buzzy. Buzzy said that this congregation was like 50% smart. That's what he said, 50% smart. And so we have to have like a little quiz here on those things. So Buzzy, you're over here. So for today, for this Sunday school class only, you guys are the smart side. Smart side. All right. And besides that, my wife is on this side over here. So she's got to be on the smart side. Smart side. Smart side. Okay. You guys over here, for Sunday school only, you're the dumb side. Dumb side. Dumb side. Smart side. Dumb side. Okay, smart side. Smart side. Quiz time. Evolution is supposed to explain
diversity of life
on Earth. You have a ringer in the back who got it all out. There you go. Everybody else was like mouthing his words or something like that. All right. Diversity of life on Earth. Evolution is supposed to explain the diversity of life on Earth. Okay, dumb side. Science. Science is based on observation and testing. Whoa, smart side. Did you hear that? Man alive, that was like one unified voice. Besides, it's up here on the screen anyway on that. So, science is based on observation and testing. All right, and here we go. Scientific investigators seek to understand natural phenomenon. This is from the National Academy of Sciences. Through observation and experimentation, scientific interpretations and the facts of the explanations that account for them must be testable by observation and experimentation. Therefore, science is based on observation and testing. There we go. Very quickly, two quick different. When I'm talking about evolution, diversity of life, science is based on observation and testing. L, less than persuaded. Less than persuaded. Now, if you can't remember that phrase, remember the look on this woman's face. Does she look like she's less than persuaded? Does she look a little doubtful there, that she's a little skeptical in that? In fact, I don't think men can make a face like that. But women are like pre-programmed to do this, usually when they're listening to something that a man's telling them a lot of times. So they kind of like give you this skeptical look. Well, less than persuaded. It's a great phrase because it means that we've been listening. We've been studying. We've been looking around. We've been looking at the other evidence. It means that we're less than persuaded, and it's a good way to avoid an argument on those things. We don't want to just come out and say, well, I just don't believe in evolution. Your friend's going to say, well, I don't believe in Congress. I don't believe in creation. You'll end up deadlocking like people in Congress on those things. So we don't want to say that. We want to say, I have been listening to what my teachers have been telling us, but I am less than persuaded. Saying less than persuaded implies a willingness to be convinced. And if you're willing to listen, maybe the other person is willing to listen to you. And we don't want to use the words believe right off, because belief kind of has this idea of faith of those things. So we want to say less than persuaded. Why are we less than persuaded? Well, I have been listening to my teachers, and evolution is supposed to explain the diversity of life on Earth. But when I open my textbook, or when I listen to Nova or National Geographic, all I get is evidence for a huge diversity of one type of creature. They show me all different kinds of dogs or all different kinds of pigeons. Well, yeah, but I know we can get varieties of dogs and pigeons, but show me in the textbook where dogs came from. Where did dogs come from? Where did pigeons come from on those things? And you know, they show me the changing finch beaks lengths. Where did that finch come from? Or better yet, where did the cells that can make a beak? How did you ever get the cells to even make a beak? Where did they come from? That's what we really want to know. Not that you can get changing lengths of things or you can get different varieties of things. They show me changes in peppered moth populations. But not once have I ever found in any of the textbooks something based on observation and testing where moths came from. You want to know what? When you find a fossil of a moth, it looks like a moth. They show up with no ancestors. They show up suddenly, and they look like moths today. Where's the evolution? Don't just show me varieties of that. Tell me where the moths came from. Similarities of body parts. You know, I have 2 bones in my lower arm, 1 bone in my upper arm, like a dog does, or like a turtle does, or any of those other kinds of things. But, you know, I've never picked up a paper anywhere that explained to me where bones came from. How did organisms even get the ability to make a bone? You realize the information it takes to make a bone? It's not just a bar of iron. It's an incredibly complex thing. There's more information to make a bone than there is to manage the entire city of Tampa. I don't know if that's saying much, but there's more information in that to do those kinds of things. Or resistance to bacteria, to antibiotics. You realize there's not a single paper published anywhere on the planet that describes where bacteria come from? So if you're going to explain the diversity of life on Earth, start telling me where the diversity of life on Earth comes from. That's why I'm less than persuaded, because you're claiming to explain something so broad and so powerful, but none of your evidences ever do that. That's why I'm less than persuaded. I'm less than persuaded, and even my chimp friend's a little skeptical about all of these things, because when I turn on television or when I go to my classrooms, I get a lot of stories, very imaginative stories, very speculative stories. But I don't get real definitive scientific papers. I get tons of speculation. And now more and more we're getting computer-generated special effects that are highly convincing to kids, where a wolf-like creature can walk into the ocean and suddenly it emerges as a whale. Special effects. But nothing's really demonstrating where whales came from or how they could have even changed from a 4-legged creature back to a swimming creature on those things. This is not real evidence. And I've heard it in the classroom. Therefore, this is what we catch on TV all the time. That's why I'm less than persuaded. You're making a claim to be able to explain the diversity of life on Earth, and you never give me any evidence that actually shows the origin of the diversity of life on Earth. That's a good, solid argument. And that's why I'm less than persuaded. Less than persuaded. Okay, quiz time. Quiz time. We'll start over here with Buzzy's side again, the smart side. All right, smart side. All right. Evolution is supposed to explain the diversity of life on Earth. Diversity of life on Earth. All right. Dumb side. Science is based on observation and testing. Observation and testing. Okay, smart side. What phrase do we not want to begin our conversation with when we start off with our friends? What? Well, I just don't what? Believe in evolution. You know, Don Rice will have my head if I teach you guys to say, I don't believe on those things. Well, I just don't believe in evolution. What a showstopper. You know? How can you even have a conversation if you say, well, I just don't believe in evolution? But dumb side, you're going to open your conversation by saying, I have been listening to my teachers, but I am what? Less than persuaded. Less than persuaded. Isn't that a great way of starting it off? Guys, don't use that phrase with your wife. I mean, that's not a good way to do it on things. Don't start out with less than persuaded. I have been listening, or you can say I have been reading, I have been studying, I have been paying careful attention. That means you're looking at what the other side says. You're weighing the evidence, but I'm less than persuaded. Less than persuaded for all of those reasons I gave you. Here are two biggies. Two big, unobserved, important events. Two big, unobserved, important events, particularly when you're talking about biology. First, an unobserved natural origin of life. An unobserved natural origin of life. And the key things on this, obviously no one saw it happen, so it's not really science. Nobody is close to duplicating it, and nobody can even explain it. So if you're talking about biology, you have to get life going. You have to get life going. Now, what I mean when I'm talking about life? What do they have to explain? You know, living things, all living things, bacteria, humans, all living things grow. All living things metabolize. That means we take resources from our environment, we turn them into body parts, we turn them into energy. We all metabolize. We all reproduce. And we all adapt. When the environment changes, we can change to a limited extent. We all adapt, grow, reproduce, metabolize in those things. So in order to explain life, you have to explain the origin of all of those abilities. It's not just some simple blob of goo in these imaginative stories. And you can say to your friends with full confidence and not worry about it at all that there is not a scientific paper published by any leading research institute anywhere on the planet that documents a natural origin of life. Now that is a really definitive statement. There is not a single scientific paper published anywhere on the planet that documents a natural origin of life. And you know, I've done this talk at least 12 major universities. 12 major universities, and I said this. I spoke at Berkeley. I spoke in the Life Sciences building at Berkeley in California, and I said that statement. And I said, now this is an easy one to refute. All anybody has to do is just say, Dr. Guliuzza, here's the paper. Here's the paper. You're totally wrong. And I'm talking to a packed audience at UC Berkeley, and nobody pulls out a paper. You want to know why? Because it doesn't exist. And even though they talk about it so definitively on Nova and National Geographic, and they talk about it like, bang, it just happened, nobody has a clue of how it could begin. And way back in 2011, this paper was published in Scientific American, where this is the headline. It says, "Psst, don't tell the creationists, but scientists don't have a clue of how life began." That was in 2011. 2024, there is no clue. And he began the article by saying 20 years earlier he had an article with the same title, and his editor wouldn't let him publish it. You know what I predict? 50, 100 years from now, if the Lord hasn't returned, same headline. Because life is so incredibly, phenomenally complicated. So if you're going to talk about it, you have to get it going. Number two, you need a mechanism with the ability to change one kind of creature to a fundamentally different kind of creature. Not a big dog or a small dog, like something like this, you know, the egghead dog versus the football player dog on there. We need to have something that is completely different. And to show how misled many of these professors of them are, this paper was published in 2009 on the 200th anniversary of the birth of Charles Darwin. At that time, it was reporting on the world's longest running experiment on evolution. It had been going on for decades. Now it's been transferred down here to Florida, by the way. And every day they grow a bacteria called E. coli. It's the one living in your gut. And they grow it and they let it grow for a day, and the next morning they take 10% out and they reculture it for continue to grow. They freeze 90%. That day they reproduce. The next morning they take 10% out, let them reproduce, freeze the next 90%. And they freeze and this and this and this. And by the time this paper was published, they were up to 50,000 generations of E. coli bacteria. And it said it was an evolution in action, a 50,000 generation salute to Charles Darwin. And I read the paper and I thought, what in the world? Evolution is supposed to explain the diversity of life on Earth. And after running this experiment for decades and hitting over 50,000 generations, the E. coli bacteria was still what? E. coli. It hadn't even changed into another type of bacterium. It was the same thing. So why is this a salute to Charles Darwin? By the time they transferred this experiment from Michigan down here to Florida, they were approaching 100,000 generations. And guess what the bacteria still was? E. coli. Do you know who wants this experiment to run until the Lord returns? I do. Because I can make a prediction that if it goes that long, these bacteria who reproduce after their kind are still going to be what? E. coli, or they're going to have accumulated so many genetic mistakes that they're going to go extinct. They're not going to change into even a staph or a strep or anything else, because these organisms reproduce that way. And so now you can say with absolute confidence to your friends, there is not a scientific paper published anywhere, where on the planet, that documents by observation and testing one creature changing into a fundamentally different kind. And you can say with absolute confidence to your friends, in all of human history, whenever humans have observed a creature reproduce, it always, without exception, reproduces after its kind. So if science is based on observation and testing, which it is, based on all of our observations and all of human experience, organisms faithfully reproduce after their kind. So I don't even have to worry about the similarities of bones and all this other kind of stuff. You don't have any scientific evidence to get life going, and you don't have any evidence that it is actually observational evidence where it has actually changed from one type of creature to another type of creature. Everything is based on speculations. And that is why I'm less than persuaded. That's why I'm less than persuaded. Now, you haven't had an argument. All you've done is just give them some facts. And probably you've given them some facts of things that they have never, ever thought about or heard before. Because I guarantee you, at Florida State University or University of Florida, they're not teaching them this stuff. It's more of a brainwashing that's going on. You know, if they were really teaching them, they'd bring out the scientific papers. Next. Failed mechanism for design. Now this is a biggie, because this is what evolutionary theory was really supposed to explain all along. You know what general revelation is? General revelation is what we see in nature. But the biggest factor of general revelation, even more than stars, is living things. Living things. Living things show the wisdom and the power and the genius of the Lord Jesus Christ. Living things just do so much. Living things look incredibly engineered. Birds look engineered to what? fly, and do all they do. Fish look engineered to live in the ocean better than a submarine. Living things, intelligence, agency, purpose, all this stuff. When you see living things, you are seeing the handiwork of the Lord Jesus Christ. And that, can I pound the pulpit one more time? That is the evidence that there is a creator God more than anything else that anybody on this planet at any time has observed. It's this design. And so Darwin needs to explain why I look so incredibly designed without appealing to a designer. That's a hard job. That's a hard job. Everybody realizes that creatures look incredibly designed. I say we look designed because we're the work of a designer. Evolutionists say, no, we only look like we were designed, but we really weren't. And evolutionists would say, this is the mechanism that brings it about. Random genetic mutations coupled with their mysterious force of natural selection. And I'm going to argue this mechanism is foolish. This mechanism is foolish altogether. First of all, they have to say that genetic changes are random because they don't want them to be purposeful. But what we do know with real random genetic changes is that they cause disease and they cause death. That's what we know. We do know that when you go in to get your teeth x-rayed, the lab technician comes out with a lead apron and she throws it over your lap so that you don't get your gonads irradiated. Because nobody wants that. Because nobody wants damaged eggs. Nobody wants damaged sperm cells. You don't want that. So how for something that we try to avoid at all costs, this is your raw input for change? Something that breaks things? And then when someone says, well, natural selection did it or the selector did it, just say, well, show me the selector. Show me the selector. What in nature is really selecting anything? What in nature is really favoring? That's the word Darwin used in his book, The Preservation of Favored Races. I can favor, you can favor, God can favor. Things with real agency and real intelligence can favor. But how can nature act? How can nature favor? How can nature select? Do you know what Darwin did when he used that word? He used that word so he could project onto nature, intelligence and volition, so that it could act as if it was God. We have a far more rational explanation for those things. When I look at living creatures, I see parts of me and I see parts of you that conforms to the patterns of design. I see on you multiple parts working together for a purpose. I see fit and finish. I see a specific order of assembly. I see precise timing. I see things that I only see in human engineered things. I see that you're complex, so complex that the possibility of doing this by random genetic changes is absolutely infinitesimally small. And not only that, I see all kinds of systems on you which shows all or nothing unity, which means unless all of the parts are there at the right time and in the right place and in the right amounts, nothing is going to work. And if someone were to ask you, well, what are you talking about? Just say reproduction. Maybe human reproduction. Everybody knows how that works. Everybody takes courses in it in school. Unless you have all of dad's parts, mom's parts, and baby's parts working together right, you never get a baby. And if you don't get a baby, then evolution comes to a screeching halt. You need all of these things working together at the right time and the right amount. So I see incredible evidences of design. So I'm able to say to my friends, when I put things to a head-to-head test, random mutations coupled to some mystical selection event where you're trying to personify nature as if it can act, compared to the things that I just mentioned, the parts and everything, I have a more rational explanation. And that's kind of a cheap way for me to put this picture in of my youngest son, who's in the red football hat, putting this incredible stopping tackle on the opposing team right before he gets to the goal line. And, it was a head-to-head collision, and that's why I put it in there. You can't do that anymore because you end up with kids that are brain dead or something like that. But that's what we find. And then finally, we want to end our conversation with the freedom that we find in creation science. Like what kinds of freedoms? This kind of freedom. Freedom where I can detail for them a few positive aspects, such as what? This is a biggie. The freedom to follow the evidence wherever it leads. The freedom to follow the evidence wherever it leads. Evolutionists like to claim they're the ones who have this freedom. No. Many of you remember back in the 1990s when Kansas was trying to allow the teaching of the criticisms of evolution and positive evidences for design. That really caused an uproar. Scott Todd published in the world's leading scientific paper, he said, even if all the data point to an intelligent designer, such a hypothesis is excluded from science because it is not naturalistic. What? I'm an engineer. I don't operate like that. If all the data indicated that this roof were to collapse, I would listen to it. I'm a medical doctor. If your tests and your labs and your signs and your symptoms all indicated that you had a certain disease, I would listen to it. Nobody ignores all the data unless you have a preconceived notion. Number two, I like the freedom from magical words. Magical words. Like what kinds of magical words? Oh, these are what you hear all the time on Nova and National Geographic. Words like, these creatures arose, they emerged, they appeared, something gave rise to, derived, burst onto the scene. And I've pulled every one of these from scientific papers. You know what all of these words are doing? They're covering up a bunch of missing data. It arose, magic. It gave rise to, magic. Burst onto the scene, magic. It evolved to, magic. I wish I had one of those little clicker things when I was a kid called a cricket. And I would print these magic words on the back, and moms could give it to their kids, and they could watch Nova or National Geographic. And when your kids heard these magic words, they could click, click, click. Moms, you could maybe do smart kid versus dumb kid or something like that on there. But it would be teaching them to listen carefully. Listen carefully for all the magic that you have. Here's a man who's claimed to be really smart. He says 4 billion years ago, see if you can find any magic here, some conjury of molecules danced, blindly catalyzing one another's formation, reaching a critical diversity at which self-sustaining webs of reactions emerged and formed life. Blind interactions gave rise to the emergent phenomenon of cellular life, cells linked in metabolic exchanges, blindly creating the first ecosystems. Those ecosystems have unfolded over billions of years with a profusion of species emerging and passing into extinction. And at each level, we sense emergent lawfulness in the profusion. Wow. Or you might read a headline, study of salamanders in ponds demonstrates the invisible finger of evolution. Brothers and sisters, these are magical words. And you know what these are? These are religious conclusions masquerading as science. They're their beliefs. They're their religious thinking, and they hide it under the cloak of science. When Carl Sagan begins his book, Cosmos, and he says, the universe is all there is, or ever was, or ever will be. He has not done any scientific experiments to demonstrate that, because he can't do a scientific experiment to demonstrate that. Do you know what Carl Sagan is doing? He's declaring for you and for everybody else his view of the world, and he's cloaking it. He's cloaking it in this scientific garb so that it has the authority of science. I like the freedom from religious statements masquerading as science. I like the freedom from these magical words, and so should you. And so if you have 5 minutes to talk to your friend, don't argue with them. Don't jump to, saying, well, I just don't believe in what you say. Focus the discussion. Define your terms. Evolution is supposed to explain the diversity of life on Earth. He says, where'd you get that? National Association of Biology teachers. Science is based on observation and testing. I'm less than persuaded because I have been listening carefully to my teachers and professors and everything that I've been taught over my many decades of life. And I'm less than persuaded because as a biological science, evolution is supposed to explain at least 2 things: how to get life going, and how one organism can change to a fundamentally different kind. And to this day, I don't know of a single scientific paper published anywhere on the planet which is able to document those kinds of things. I'm less than persuaded because all of the incredible design and engineering that we see in creatures, your mechanism appeals to random genetic changes and some mystical selection event. And on top of that, you throw into it magical words, you're not willing to follow the evidence, and you have this belief in religious conclusions which are all dressed up as science. And that's why I'm less than persuaded. Now, I've told you why I am less than persuaded on these things, and I've given you my discussion. But if you just will bear with me for just another minute, I would like to tell you what I do believe. I do believe there was a creator. His name is the Lord Jesus Christ. He spoke everything into existence, and far more importantly than even talking about creation, he came, he suffered, and he died on your behalf. And I would like to introduce you to him, the real creator. And that's what we do when we have 5 minutes with our Darwinian friends. Thank you so very much for your time, your attention.